You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
This episode of Mission Log is brought to you by listeners like you, supporters on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/missionlog.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 461, Cold Fire.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Norman Lau.
And I'm John Champion. Each week on Mission Log, we take a look at each and every episode of Star Trek, searching for the morals, meanings, and messages contained therein, and seeing if they withstand the test of time.
This week, Cold Fire, the one where Kes discovers more Ocampa lost in the Delta Quadrant while harnessing the power to boil tea with her mind.
I will be back with trivia in a moment, right after Norm tells you how you can reach us.
Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Twitter and Facebook at MissionLogPod. While you're at it, leave us a review and a rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on Mission Log or Engage on the Roddenberry YouTube channel. And now, here is John Champion with this week's trivia.
All right, this week's episode, Cold Fire. We have a story by Anthony Williams, and this is kind of a cool story. Anthony was working in the advertising promotions department at Paramount, but he submitted some story ideas from time to time. He has 2 in Voyager, this and one more coming up later in the season. His one other professional credit as a writer is on the screenplay for Young Chatterley 2, which featured Adam West and Sybil Danning. Audience, you can do your own research on this one, but if you had Showtime in the late 80s, you already know. All right, we have a teleplay by Brannon Braga because, of course, I think we'll get into the very Braga-esque aspects of this episode later. And it was directed by Cliff Bole, and it's really nice to see Cliff's name here. He cut his teeth on TNG, and then we saw him move over to DS9, where he directed 7 episodes there. He wrapped up on that show with Facets, which aired almost at the very end of the 3rd season in June 1995. That brings his next Star Trek gig to this episode, his first of 10 Voyagers, which aired in November of the same year. What is Suspiria, you might ask? Now, I haven't seen it written down anywhere, but knowing that Brannon has a soft spot in his heart for esoteric horror, I figured right away that the name of the alien was taken from Dario Argento's 1977 film of the same name. Now, the word itself is derived from Latin and means to breathe or to sigh. Regardless, the movie is an award-winning cult favorite. At this point, one of my favorites of the genre, honestly, known for its striking color palette and the soundtrack by the prog rock band Goblin. Go check it out if 1970s Italian horror is your bag, baby. Let's talk about our guest stars. The Ocampan male we spend the most time with, Tanis, is played by Gary Graham. Now, for those of you playing the home game, you already know that this is Gary's first Star Trek appearance, but it certainly won't be his last. We won't see him again until we get to Enterprise, but he does have a major recurring role there. He's also appeared in a few unofficial Trek projects, and in the meantime, if you want to see more of him, you can find him on TV series like Mantis or Jag. Of course, many sci-fi fans know him as Detective Sykes when he starred in the TV series and TV movies of Alien Nation. And by the way, we are talking about an actor who early on auditioned for the roles of both Captain Sisko and Captain Janeway.
John, if I may jump in here for 1 second,
Please.
I would be remiss not to bring up 2 words that identify with a lot of science fiction fans that are fans of Gary Graham. Robot jocks.
Yes, bravo, a worthy addition. Now, Suspiria is played by Lindsay Ridgway. She is best known for a long run on the hit sitcom Boy Meets World, and she got her start very young, actually appearing in the ride film for Disney's Tower of Terror. I love that kind of thing. While Lindsay retired from acting in 2004, she did show up a few years ago as a guest star in the revival series Girl Meets World. This is her only Star Trek appearance. And before we go, one very well-known Trek performer appears here as well. The voice for Suspiria is indeed not Lindsay Ridgway for a good portion of the story, but actually Majel Barrett Roddenberry. And we shouldn't have to explain that one.
There's something in this story to get everyone's blood boiling. But hey, let's start with Tuvok's blood.
Prologue. Cass is still learning telepathic techniques from Tuvok. She hones in on Neelix, but her giggles break the psychic bond, annoying Tuvok and reminding Cass that she's late for work in sickbay. When she arrives, the Doctor's annoyance gives way to curiosity when they both discover that the remains of the Caretaker, the alien entity that brought them to the Delta Quadrant, is rattling and emitting a high-pitched tone. Act 1. Captain Janeway and B'Elanna Torres arrive to investigate, and those rock-solid remains of Banjo Man are certainly dead, but then the same thing happens again. B'Elanna detects that it's a sporocystean energy source from outside the ship that the remains are responding to. Could it be another being like the Caretaker, his mate? And if they find this other being, could it send them home? Tuvok encourages some caution. He'll work on a sort of toxin to the sporocystean life form in case this one is not as vulnerable as the Caretaker who they met. The crew then use the Caretaker's remains as a kind of compass, directing Voyager to a location about 10 light-years away once they pick up the energy signal again. When they arrive, there's a space station, small but very similar to the Caretaker's array, but no sign of sporocystean life. What they do detect is some 2,000 Ocampa life forms, but before they can get closer, the station fires weapons directly at Voyager, fortunately causing no damage. Then a communication channel opens. The person on the other end of the line is an Ocampan man who makes his warning very clear: you're not wanted here. Act 2. Being our resident Ocampa, Kes is brought in for a briefing. That station is 300 years old, and as far as she knows, there are no stories about Ocampa ever leaving their homeworld. They contact the station again, and the person on the other end of the line is a little more receptive to have a meeting once he sees Kes. Tanis, as he is called, comes to Voyager and says that their reputation in the Delta Quadrant doesn't exactly give him confidence. Voyager is seen as a threat, but Janeway gives him every reassurance that they are not. They're just looking for the Caretaker's mate to see if she can help them get home. Unbeknownst to the captain, Tanis telepathically contacts Kes to say that he wants to talk to her alone. When they do, Kes again reassures him that the Voyager crew are trustworthy and saved her life. But Tanis digs more. He wants to see what Kes is all about, and they start by going to the aeroponics facility. Sure, there are plants and everything, and the ship is what Kes calls home, but Tanis says she's missing out on a real life by being on Voyager, that life with other Ocampa is so much more vibrant. He knows the Caretaker's mate. Her name is Suspiria, and their species is called the Nassim. She's given his people some incredible powers, like over life itself. He, in fact, is 14 years old, unheard of for Ocampa. And to illustrate his point further on what Kes is missing, Tanis wills the plants around them to bloom and grow at an incredible rate. Later, Janeway praises Kes's breakthrough with Tanis, but Kes expresses that she is of mixed emotions. She's glad to be the intermediary, but she doesn't know how to take Tanis. She wants to explore her own abilities, but is a little frightened of Tanis's powers. Aboard his station, Tanis telepathically contacts Suspiria about Kes, but the voice he hears isn't interested in another Ocampa. She just wants Voyager. Act 3. Over dinner, Tanis shares what he knows about Suspiria, that she exists as Sporocystian energy, that she shows up when needed, that she'd be interested in meeting Kes. But maybe Kes would want to stay around, like permanently, on the station. Neelix's face registers discomfort, while Janeway says that she should give it some thought. Tanis will spend some time later with Kes, helping to strengthen her mental abilities. She's getting much better with Tanis's guidance, much to Neelix's chagrin. They reassure each other, though, that if she decides to stay with the other Ocampa on the array, that she would want him there, and Neelix says he'd go anywhere with her. What neither of them know is that elsewhere on Voyager, Tuvok and the Doctor have been successful in coming up with a toxin that can certainly be used as a weapon against a Sporocystian being, if the need should arise. Arriving at the coordinates where Tanis directs Voyager, there's no sign of Suspiria yet. Tanis sends out a subspace carrier wave and says that he'll know when she has arrived. With some waiting to do, Kes shows Tuvok that she has stepped up to certain telekinetic abilities way beyond her simple telepathy he taught her. Tuvok urges caution, but Kes demonstrates how she can excite the molecules in a cold cup of tea, bringing it to a boil. She can't stop, though, and the cup boils over and breaks. Kes calls out telepathically for Tuvok to help her, but when she sees him, his face is blistered and boiled, and blood drips from his eyes and nose. As Kes screams in horror, Tuvok falls to the floor. Act 4. That was no delusion. In sickbay sometime later, the EMH brings Tuvok back to consciousness and reports that Kes accidentally boiled his blood. In typical Vulcan fashion, Tuvok gets off the examination bed and gets back to work, issuing the doctor's warnings. He even cuts off Kes before she can apologize. He wants her to see this as a learning experience, and he wants to continue to teach her so that incidents like this don't happen again. In the aeroponics bay, Kes has an unexpected visitor when Tanis shows up and says that he knows what happened even without being directly told. Her powers are strong and getting stronger. She's so strong, in fact, that she could someday grow to see Voyager's crew as mentally weak, almost like pets. She says no, they're her friends, but Tanis keeps pushing her to see and feel her own mental powers. In this very room, she can manipulate the plants around her. They glow bright colors, and everything around her takes on vivid hues. The fire in her mind becomes a literal swirl of energy around her until Kes temporarily passes out on the floor. When Tanis comes to her, she awakens to see that all the plants around her are dead. She's a bit worried about these powers, but Tanis again makes the case that she should come back to the station. After all, she's beyond all of this. The power to give life or take it away, the power to see the universe as it really is. She doesn't need Voyager. She has to come with him. She can live among her own people, develop her powers, live with Suspiria in a place of pure thought known as Exotia. It's pretty tempting, but Kes needs more time to think about it. Act 5. Suspiria has arrived. A subspace rupture opens in front of Voyager, and in engineering, the remains of the Caretaker react as before. But something else happens in engineering. Some kind of plasma field worms its way in, and soon B'Elanna disappears from the comms channel with the bridge. Captain Janeway goes to investigate just as Tuvok calls for a security team. Inside, Janeway finds a young girl holding the remains of the Caretaker, and she asks why they killed him. Janeway tries to explain that they didn't, that he died, but before that, he brought them to this part of the galaxy, and they merely want to go home. Meanwhile, in the mess hall, Tanis is pressuring Kes again to come stay with him and the other Ocampa on the station, but Kes senses the presence of Suspiria and knows that she is there to destroy Voyager. Oh, yes, that is definitely right, as about that same time, the little girl's demeanor changes and becomes much more threatening. She's already suspended B'Elanna and Tuvok in midair, bleeding over Janeway. Then Suspiria turns her attention to the captain herself, simultaneously constricting and levitating her with her telekinetic powers. Elsewhere on the ship, the bridge officers are alarmed to see that the molecular structure of Voyager is tearing itself apart. In the mess hall, Tanis is forcefully demanding Kes return with him to the station and leave Voyager behind. When Neelix tries to intervene, Tanis dispatches him across the room with a telekinetic thrust. Kes, seeing Tanis more clearly now, uses her own telekinetic abilities to do to him what she did to Tuvok. The pain, not to mention the bleeding, is nearly unbearable, and he loses his grip on Kes. At the same time, Suspiria loses her psychic grip on the others in engineering, giving Janeway the opportunity to release that sporocystic toxin on the intruder. It works long enough to capture a still defiant Suspiria in a force field, and she assumes that Janeway will kill her, just like she killed the Caretaker. Okay, one more time for the people in the back. Janeway reiterates that they did not kill the Caretaker. They just want to go home. And to prove how honorable they are, Janeway drops the force field in a show of mercy. And Suspiria transforms back into her alien Nacine form and zips right out of there, taking Tanis with her by dematerializing him out of the mess hall. Neelix will be okay. Suspiria has escaped into subspace. The ship will be fine, but that's one more alien that could have gotten Voyager home, gone again. After all the drama, Tuvok and Kes sit down for another session, but this time Kes admits that her more intense telekinetic abilities have left her since Tanis disappeared. She's glad, though, and glad that the temptation to leave has left her too. She'd rather be done with those dark thoughts. Tuvok reminds her, though, that those unpleasant thoughts are still a part of her and need to be acknowledged. She has them. Even Tuvok has them, just like every other Vulcan. The trick is to be aware, because ignoring them can cause them to escape. The end.
Fantastic recap, John, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do something completely different before we jump into observations. We're going to jump into observations, I know, but we're going to jump in cold fire feet first into the fire.
Oh, that's good. All right, here we go. Cold fire feet first. I love the opening with the recap from Voyager's pilot episode, because I feel like for all the episodes that have gotten us off track with the actual premise and mission of the show, it's nice to see some acknowledgement and then just direct tie back to that first story. It's also a good way that they could have used their escape clause. You know, in this case, just revealed to the audience that the Caretaker was not going to be the way home. So hats off to them for just doing that, just making a direct tie.
Question, though. So they actually specifically said 10 months ago, which is probably why Samantha Wildman wasn't in this episode, just to make sure. Right.
Exactly. Samantha Wildman's somewhere on the ship going, really, 10 months? Really? Come on.
That recap can't be right.
Please just have a baby now, right? Did you have the same feeling that I did about Tuvok's telepathic experiment with Kes? Like, is this an invasion of privacy? Can she hear a bunch of voices throughout the ship, really? I mean, it's a good thing that Neelix wasn't thinking something awful or inappropriate. But this is just what they do. Like, by the way, crew of Voyager, make an announcement of the PA. By the way, Kes and Tuvok are going to be reading your minds for the next hour. So
I always thought
Baxter, go to the gym.
I always thought that the Vulcan mind meld was intimate with one hand, but then it was almost extreme in its application with two hands, the way we saw Spock do that to Valeris in the Undiscovered Country.
Yeah.
So obviously there is a technique involved with Vulcan mind probe or Vulcan mind meld and manipulation. But it's almost as if he could use Kes's ability as an antenna for him to basically listen to everybody else.
Oh my God, that's so twisted.
No, Twisted was episodes ago, and we had a problem with that. No, this is completely different.
Oh, right. That was the other one. Hey, since she's listening in on Neelix, that made me think of a conversation that I had with Holly, our very own Holly Amos, part of the show, several months ago, because this was a news item. And it was, does your internal monologue come across in complete sentences and thoughts, or is it just disjointed thoughts, emotions, etc.? Because Neelix is having a full-on conversation with himself, which is a little weird, I thought. But I'll pose that to you and to the audience.
That is so strange. I never really thought of it that way, as I'm trying to understand my inner monologue right now. But here's what I do know. I like that Neelix is in a different, pardon the pun, headspace right now with just thinking about different, more fun things like, getting his nose hairs clipped or serving food to people. Could you imagine, man, that pointy-eared Vulcan son of a bee,
Right. Yeah. We don't want that. I do love that, Tuvok responds so strongly to her giggles, and I just thought, the old giggle inhibitor from Planet Vulcan, that's a good band name, too, if anybody needs it. Giggle inhibitor, you can have that. And what's with that smile that Chakotay gives to Janeway? Yeah. When we talk about B'Elanna using the Caretaker's remains like a compass, she turns back, and there's Chakotay, big old smile.
That was the weirdest thing. So, timestamp, 7 minutes, 42 seconds in. I had to timestamp that because I look at, why Robert Beltran would have made that choice. Because Janeway is saying something, and she turns to him, and he just smiles like that old expression, like the cat ate the canary. What is he smiling about? And why so long and so lingering on that shot?
Not only is he just smiling to a purely technical thing, here's our directional thing. It's also literally the remains of the Caretaker. It's like Captain gives the order, get out the dead guy's bones, hook him up to the computer, and use him like a compass. That's morbid and weird anyway. And Chakotay's just got that big old smile on his face.
There's an interesting jealousy in the Doctor when he said you'd think a Vulcan would be more tuned to punctuality. So I do believe that, we're going to go back to when we mentioned the Doctor has feelings for Kes. I do think that still is the case. And now, because she's spending more time with Mr. Vulcan than him, he's making her know that.
Yep. Yeah. Very interesting to keep playing this with Kes. By the way, speaking of Kes, quite the dramatic reveal with Janeway stepping away to reveal Kes on the view screen. They chose to do that. I love that it's a choice. And also, just technical note, I love the lighting on the bridge like this. I mean, I've always thought that Voyager just had one of the best bridge designs. And sometimes they take it to the next level with how it's lit and photographed. So one more reason that Marvin Rush is one of my heroes. I just think he's great as a DP on this and every Trek show he touched.
So you have this thing introduced, this sporocystine toxin. And Tuvok came up with this idea because just in case things go wrong with strange new life forms that we usually seek out as per our mandate in Starfleet, if things go wrong, let's make sure that we have a weapon that can kill it. Just in case.
Hold that thought, my friend. Let's come back to that.
And here's the other thing. So you have this, and then you have Janeway look at her first officer, at Chakotay, for his guidance. Tuvok makes a good point. What do you think, first officer? And Chakotay looks away and down at the ground sorry, Mom, I have no opinion whatsoever. That really bothered me. Because she's supposed to, he's supposed to have that look of conviction. He looked more interested in whatever she said than smiled at him, or smiled at her for that weird long time, than have any feedback on this poison that Tuvok's going to make to countermeasure the Caretaker's mate if anything goes wrong.
That is a weird point, right? Oh, my God. All right, let's talk about Tanis coming over for a visit. He says to Kes when they're in the aeroponics lab, this is a cold and barren place. Okay, but again, dude, let me repeat Kes's words to you. You live on a space station. He's so judgmental. Come on. Really nice moment of Kes expressing her conflicting emotions about Tanis and Tuvok chiming in to say, like, just be non-emotional.
Of course.
Then Janeway, I love that. And Janeway reminding her that she's not Vulcan. I felt like all of that was a perfect kind of Star Trek shorthand. And played really nicely.
It's as if they had like Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, but just in two people in that conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, nicely done. I got nothing to add to the conversation about the food on that banquet table. Lots of leaves, That's what I saw. So, and I didn't really do the math, but 300 years, that is a lot of Ocampa generations. Because, they become sexually mature, sometime around 2 or a little after 2, but they only live to 9, so, a lot.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I have to drop a pun in here for all of you people who know this reference. So we're talking about Tanis, so Tanis development proceeding, when we're talking about Tanis. So you have these interesting facts that are brought up. A 14-year-old Ocampan breaking the cycle of 10, or 10 that we know, 10 years maturity that we know.
Maximum
that we know. So I wish they got a little more into showing like the technology that extended this colonist's, age level, their age average. Also, so you mentioned elogium. You mentioned at 2 they become sexually mature. So what happens when you have a 14-year-old or a 20-year-old that mates for life with an Ocampan that changes kind of like the course, the trajectory of their age? I mean, does that do anything to them, like physiologically, mentally, physically?
Yeah.
There's just so much now that has changed because the only thing that we knew in Elogium is that, Ocampans age for 10 years and that's it.
Yeah.
But now it's different. So,
I mean, I feel like part of it might be technology. Part of it is Suspiria keeping them, like essentially doing to them what Tanis does to those flowers, making them sort of hyper alive. But it does raise this question, like, what does it do? I might have another thought on that in a moment, too. I thought it was a fun little bit of CG when Kes is warming up that cup of tea. Like, it's not really necessary. You could just cut to the cup, see it boil, see it crack. But, we went to the effort to have the molecular structure of it.
So it's kind of this interesting, weird amalgamation of like the Force and the Matrix all happening at once, like in her mental abilities. Because you're right. It's nice to see. It's nice to see the technology at work. The special effects, but they went really deep, like into like the molecular level of the manipulation, which I know it pays off later, but. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Look, we have to point out 47 when we can, but come on, 47 hours, really?
Right.
Like, the only thing we've gotten that's not a standard Earth day, 24 hours, is Bajor being 26 hours. And now here we just have an odd number, and I'm sorry, I'm not here for it. Too egregious.
I didn't recognize Bajor. I usually say Bajor. But, that's just me. And it's like, don't make sure that that Suspiria doesn't do your cable because she'll show up in anywhere between 8 to 47 hours. That's just nuts.
Yeah, we don't want that. Dude, I loved that blistering, bleeding Tuvok special effect makeup because sometimes when Star Trek goes horror, just go horror, just do it, and they did it there. They went for it. Yeah,
I liked that a lot, and it was really extreme. I liked how they manipulated Jennifer's voice when she screamed because it was almost kind of like this weird sonic layering that was going on. It gave her like an alien sound, which was nice. But I wish that they kind of went a little bit further with what they did to Tuvok. I mean, it was there, but I wanted it to go just a little bit further, a little bit more blistery, a little bit more gory.
You had that interesting kind of like Rick Baker, American Werewolf with kind of the pulsing, moving that expansion of his face,
Yeah, like the bladders were like, pulsating and stuff. Yeah, sure.
Very cool, very cool. And I love the doctor's line, Vulcans make the worst patients. kind of a great moment, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that they bring up the whole Vulcan healing technique thing because we don't really know how many hours passed between when his blood was literally boiling and his skin was literally bubbling.
Yeah.
I wish there was some, again, scarring or just effect. to show that he's still healing, like he's still not quite settled.
Yeah, give him something. Slow him down or whatever, Yeah, we need to see some recognition of that. It was a little magical that he gets off the exam bed. I really like the lighting and color change in the aeroponics bay when Kes is doing her bit, but man, did they just go straight up orange for Gary Graham. At some point you cut back to him and like, wow, dude is orange. Yeah.
If one takes that interpretation differently, saying all the different color saturations in the hydroponics bay, one could assume that maybe this is what you're seeing when you're on some type of vision quest,
Yeah.
where things have been mind altered.
Well, I like that idea because I was thinking the same thing. That doesn't have to be a literal thing, but it is their perception of it, which is kind of cool. Yeah. All right, Norm, it's our favorite line of the whole episode because Gary Graham delivers it with all such sincerity. Bring the fire. And I could just, in my head, I see that as like the tour name for some band, like, Def Leppard is back on the road with Bring the Fire in 1989. Yeah. Right?
So,
love it.
So you just add Suspiria to their discography after Pyromania.
Right after Pyromania. Yes. Yeah, sure. You have to. Okay. Yeah. So I guess, do we infer from this that all Nasine kind of looked like big purple space slugs? Because I didn't really get that impression necessarily from the Caretaker. That's not what I walked away with. And if that is the case, why haven't we got an action figure of this?
Ooh, custom action figure, big purple sluggy type thing. I like the purple energy tentacles that were kind of like forming around Torres when she's talking to the captain about this is what we can do, to make sure that we do the thing.
Yeah.
All right, so here's where they're going so well. It gets a little tropish. Like, of course, the big bad, Suspiria. Of course, she has to be a diminutive young girl in a pink dress with a stuffed animal because why not force something into this situation, right?
Children are creepy. Children are creepy. It's a horror. It's a horror thing. It's a real life thing. I mean, think about it. Think about how effective that can be in a horror when you have, a movie like The Omen, or you go back to the Twilight Zone and you've got little Billy Mummy just wishing people away. I mean, children are creepy. Sorry, some of you in our audience, you got children. Don't turn your backs.
So when you actually saw the Suspiria, the young girl, turn into the giant purple tentacle creature, did it take away some of that great mysticism of the Caretaker away? Like, did it take that away? Did it remove some of that, just kind of like that suspension of disbelief that this is like this greater otherworldly being? Now they're just kind of like purple tentacle aliens. And that doesn't really, I don't know, that doesn't excite me.
Yeah, I kind of don't read that, and that's the thing, that I didn't make that association of the purple space slug with the alien, because I kind of don't want to know what the Caretaker, what the Nasine look like. Yeah, I like the idea that they manipulate their form to be whatever is there to be interacted with by the alien that they're encountering, Oh, and I do love, this last line. I love how much we get about being Vulcan from Tuvok, because we haven't had that since Spock. And the Vulcan heart was forged out of barbarism and violence. I thought that was such a great line, lest anyone forget. But of course, man, Norm, I don't know if it's just you, but me, I have such a hard time believing that about kindly old Tuvok. I mean, surely there's not a terrifying heart of barbarism and violence beating in him, you think?
Maybe Tanis would have more luck with his recruiting if he did a presentation with PowerPoint slides on the benefits of joining forces with Suspiria.
We will get back to Cold Fire in a moment, but first, a message to all of you about you.
Yeah, so the sponsor of this week's show is you, specifically all of you who have joined us at Patreon. You've done that at patreon.com/missionlog. You hear us week after week talk about how much we appreciate it and what you get out of it. And This episode is dropping shortly after we've gone to Vegas, and I gotta say, Patreon added a whole new level to that experience, because if you think about it, Norman, you have the online experience of Patreon. People can listen to our shows early, they can watch the video. You have the physical Patreon stuff, the swag that people get in the mail. You have the sort of virtual meeting that is our Discord that is exclusive to Patreon. But now we had like Patreon in real life. All the people who joined us at patreon.com/missionlog and came to the Vegas convention, you had your own exclusive party in a suite. And I have to say, I hope it's the first of many more to come, because it was so cool to hang out in person, in real life, and see all those happy faces in the same room.
And that's why we do what we do on Patreon and, of course, on our Discord, because it brings a community together. And what's really nice and was fantastic, like John said, about being able to meet everyone in person in Las Vegas for our Patreon/Discord meetup, just to put a handshake and a smile with the faces that we see almost every week during our live shows and during some of our special features that we have throughout the course of the week as we interact with everyone there on our Discord, which is fantastic.
Yeah, so you know what to do. Go to patreon.com/missionlog, just like these fine folks did. Let's give a shout out to some of our most recent members: Michelle, Starfleet View Ships, I hope I got that right, Anne, Matthew, Matt, and Stuart. Welcome all. Can't wait to see what new names we get to read next time we talk to you about Patreon. Again, we'll see you there at patreon.com/missionlog. Norman, there was something you brought up in the last segment about the Ocampa lifespan. And I wondered, something that I thought about was maybe that 9-year lifespan is what is correct for the Ocampa, because maybe their powers can and do develop rapidly. Maybe they can and do get out of hand. Maybe that happened in their evolutionary path at some point. So maybe this is sort of a protection against their own mental abilities. If they kept going for, 20 years and beyond, maybe those powers would get weaponized. I mean, that's not to say that any species can't act horribly and weaponize the tools that they have, but maybe that's just kind of how it played out for them.
It's an interesting thing that you bring that up, like this limited lifespan, because now we're looking at, say, replicant technology from Blade Runner, where the replicants only have X amount of energy so that they can only perform X amount of, tasks during the course of their lives, so that they don't overrun normal society, because they are in every way, shape, and form a physical human being, aside from the energy level that they are obviously lacking. So that's an interesting, fixed point in time that the Ocampans have, looking at their own, at the end of their own existence. So do they, in evolving faster, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to tap into their abilities. I mean, with the whole process with Tanis, his development proceeding, with Kes, it's about someone who has been taught the ability to do this, and someone who knows how intoxicating that ability is, to be able to tap into that power, to be able to become something greater than you would have possibly imagined. I mean, I think that, I'll get to it later, but I think that that's kind of like this interesting cautionary tale that's brought into this story, where here's what you can be, but should you be?
Right. Yeah, good point. Good point. All right, I want to bring it back to another comment that you made in the last segment, because absolutely, we're on the same kind of wavelength here. This preemptive armament with a deadly weapon, this is rare to see on Star Trek. And I guess we could make the assumption that anywhere one of these starships flies, well, they are bringing deadly weapons with them. That is just a given. Voyager shows up somewhere. Look at Tanis' reaction. Your ship is seen as dangerous. You go around taking resources, you blow up things, you make enemies out of other people. The reception in the Delta Quadrant has not exactly been warm, but here's a starship that has photon torpedoes, has phasers, can fight its way out of a situation. But this moment felt different. A being that they had encountered before with some sympathy, let's not forget, and now we're building a weapon specifically to take something like it on. On the one hand, it's a bit of a clunky storytelling convenience. Think about Queen to Queen's Level 3 in Whom Gods Destroy. You never heard that term before. You never had a little gambit like that with a code word for the transfer. You never had that before. You just create it for the story, and it stands out like a sore thumb because you did it.
Right.
On the other hand, this is Star Trek, and this comes across as a very calculated way to kill or at least endanger a potential enemy.
I mean, even in the Corbomite maneuver, that extreme choice that Kirk had to make, that was done at the very end, where he only really had one choice, and that was to bluff. Right? This isn't that. This is a calculated strategy against a being, again, that they knew, that there were others out there. And then Tuvok, I know that he's head of security, and I know that logically it's probably the right thing to do. But when you're looking at it from a Star Trek fan's point of view, there's a reason why, like what Tanis said, and beautifully performed by Gary Graham, when he said that yours is a ship of death, that was an incredibly well-deserved slap in the face to the Voyager crew. Yeah. Because they're like, you know what? You're not Federation in the Delta Quadrant. You're not Starfleet in the Delta. You are nothing in the Delta Quadrant. You are the ship that, ever since you appeared, the wake of tragedy and death and destruction has followed you. Right? Yeah. So it's interesting that this Ocampan leader and the sect that he leads has that perception of them. I mean, think about it. Without the resources of a great marketing spin machine and, say, like ambassadors and positive outreach that the Federation has in the Alpha Quadrant, because it's power base, right? Yeah. How do you change the public image's perception of you when these things happen? You do it through relationships, you do it through allies, you do it through public relations, you do it through ambassadors. But what happens when you don't have any of that, right? Does it make the Ocampan's observations any less untrue?
Well, that's the thing. It is definitely not true from their point of view. They're lacking context, and we're not here just to condemn Starfleet or specifically Voyager's crew. But I thought about this from another perspective as well. It's like, okay, every time we see a starship crew beam down to a planet with phasers, we just expect it. We just go, oh, of course, they're going to a new planet. They have no idea who they're going to encounter. They've got phasers. They have these handheld weapons with enormous destructive power in their hands, right? But at the same time, we've never actually heard them acknowledge to each other, hey, we're beaming down to a planet. Let's make sure we can kill anything that approaches us. And that's what it is. That is literally what it is. And here's Tuvok, based on the interaction with the Caretaker, if I were captain, I don't think that would seem like a reasonable course of action. It's reasonable only because of the story that unfolds in this specific episode. But if you use history as a guide here, the Caretaker was just sad, lonely, and frail. I mean,
when you look at it from kind of like the 10,000-foot perspective, we've always believed that. And I'm glad that you brought up the example of, when Starfleet beams to a planet or beams to somewhere new, they're defensive, of course, but they do have weapons drawn most of the time. And I think that's in actually more newer Star Trek than older Star Trek. But we believe, because we're looking at it from the lens of the heroes, we're looking at the perspective of we being Starfleet as the audience, we naturally believe that the decisions are made in the right and moral way, in the right and moral context. But what if they aren't? Right? I think that sometimes, we don't really look at it from that perspective. And I like how Tanis, again, uses that as kind of a sticking point when meeting Voyager. He's like, I don't know who you are. I don't know your Federation. I don't know your titles. I don't know of your merits or credits or, validity behind your statements. All I know is that this race no longer exists because of you. I'm generalizing, what happened. But this happened, this happened, this happened, and this happened. And you say that you're a ship of peace. Yeah. So how do you reconcile that? Of course the Federation can say we are. In our space, it's our backyard, Yeah. And we have allies that they may not agree with us, but they'll support us because they want to be allies. But when you don't have any allies working with you, it's all about what you do, not about what you say.
And look, to Janeway's credit, I mean, she and her crew have attempted in many of these first contact situations to talk their way out of a fight. that is absolutely, that's a given. We're not condemning our heroes here, but at the same time, you have to look at the repercussions of the actions. That it's not out of the realm of possibility that word would get around like this. I want to move on a little bit and just talk briefly about Tuvok as a teacher here, because I wondered, think about him in Learning Curve and how unwilling he was to sort of bend his methods to meet his students where they are and really become the mentor that they needed. I say this partly in jest, but we do start out with him basically telling Kes to not be herself. Like, you should be less emotional. Don't giggle. You should be more like a Vulcan. And then he does it again. I mean, not everyone is Vulcan. But then, as a Star Trek fan, I go, okay, you know what? This is part of the fun of having a Vulcan around, is their presumed superiority and the attitude that everything would be better if everyone else just acted a little more Vulcan. I get that. It's entertaining. I do think that Tuvok redeems himself quite a bit from a scene that almost starts a little weird. It's when he gets up from the examination table and he cuts off Kes, says, "You are probably feeling the emotion of remorse, possibly guilt. I advise you to look on this incident as a learning experience." Of course, he says it in a very cold Vulcan way. And yes, she did almost kill him, but it's his way, I guess, of the non-emotional, we're cool. It's the non-emotional.
Forget about it, right?
Yeah. Which just, it played strange, but at the end of that scene, I felt it played better than it started. Because it comes across as a bit jarring, at least I thought it did.
I think he didn't want her to dwell on it. And I think that's a very stereotypical, like, Vulcan mentality. It happened. If we dwell on it, it doesn't change the fact that it happened. And we're going to need you to focus on the task at hand, because right now you're the only person that can meet Tanis at his level. So we need you focused and not distracted, and certainly not distracted by thinking of what could have happened to me, what you almost did to me. That's in the past. Even if it's in hours, that's still in the past. And you're not going to affect that. You're only going to affect the present and future. So I like that. And I think that Tuvok, and Tim plays it brilliantly. I like that there are three major points of this episode where you see Tuvok incrementally grow. At the very beginning, where he's, of course, trying to manipulate or try to be the authority of, this is how you discipline yourself if you actually think like a Vulcan and don't, and entertain your giggles. Then there's this. Like, look what happened when you actually you became unfocused and didn't keep your eye on the discipline of your mental abilities. And then at the end, like, let's take a look at what we've learned from these two parts, where you were unfocused, where your unfocused abilities hurt somebody, and now you see the repercussions of said actions. But you and I can move forward because we're actually communicating better in the end. Where his story about Vulcan barbarism, I think, was a soft apology saying, I'm not perfect either.
Yeah. No, I like that, and I like the idea that scene with Cass turns into the one in sickbay and later. It's his way of showing care and concern for her mental state, her growth, everything, but without the emotional context. It's the Vulcan way of showing care and concern, like hearing him talk about his kids and his wife. It's nice to get to that layer. And yeah, like you said, he plays it perfectly. All right, let's talk about what I think is, this is the meat of this story and the really interesting part of it. Here's Tanis saying to Kes to lure her over, "Once you see beyond the physical, you see the universe as it truly is." And that, that line, so much of what he did should send shivers up your spine, but that line in particular, I thought this was one of the most interesting aspects of this entire story. And it makes Tanis more of a scary cult leader than just a run-of-the-mill manipulative villain. Like, the whole notion of this life, like your present life being less important than some promised other life. The very idea that our physical limits are somehow lesser than or unworthy when compared to the promise of some other thing in the universe. This is the kind of thing that has been used and is still used over and over again to break people down and to devaluing their own lives and the people and the conditions around them in order to put greater weight on this ill-defined other thing just out there. If you'll only come with me, if you'll only abandon the people around you, if you'll only give up the things that you think are important now, then I, or this particular belief system, can show you something better. It just played on every creepy level to me, and I thought it was great.
That line in and of itself and the way that Gary delivered it, that really kind of like made me sit up and take notice, because I thought this episode was very good. I'll get into it later, but that particular line, it made me think of, again, classic science fiction, classic Star Trek, where you have these otherworldly beings ascend to the point where they're so beyond looking at the normal understanding of human comprehension or moral comprehension that they just see life so dispassionately because they've evolved so far. And this is I think the scarier thing about Tanis is that the Ocampans on that platform, on that space station, they've only tasted a fragment of the power, and that may have been artificially induced by Suspiria herself, just to keep them coddled, just to keep them in line. But when you have somebody like Tanis saying, I have experienced like a level of this power, and this is where we can go. I mean, think about, like, is this how the Ocampans eventually become the Q? Or say the Organians, right, or the Metrons, right, like these super, or the prophets, these super beings that started off, very normal in terms of like a mortal race, but over the time and over evolution, and you said this, John, it's like because the Ocampans have such short lifespans, can they ascend so quickly based on this power, this power curve, that they can just become more than they've ever dreamed in the short amount of time, in linear time, that they're comparing against their mortal counterparts. But all that being said, were they created and are they given this power to provide the adulation to a greater godlike being? Much like Adonais wanted, or Apollo wanted in Who Mourns an Adonais. The stronger the adulation, the stronger the god's power becomes. And I'm only going to give you just enough power to sing my praises so that I, myself, can become more powerful than I could possibly imagine and reach a higher plane of existence.
Ooh. You just made it even creepier.
If you feel your mojo rising, better check and make sure Kiss isn't practicing her new powers somewhere nearby.
Well, John, we are at the end of our episode, and we're not cold. The fire's still very hot.
Oh yeah,
but we are talking about cold fire. We are talking about what we do here at the very end of our Mission Log episode. We're going to take a look at, does this episode still hold up? Does it pass the test of time? Or does it have any morals, meanings, and messages that we have mined from it during the course of our discussion? I think we did, because, again, this episode, for as cold the fire is, very, very warm in our discussion.
We're going to bring it. We're going to bring that fire.
Let's start with you, John. Bring the fire.
All right. I'm going to say we probably both expected it, but Gary Graham, MVP here in this episode. He is surly and abrasive and so condescending. But he has this kind of like curiosity and realism under all of that. So he doesn't play it totally like the mustache-twirling villain here. It's too bad that this episode suffers a little bit from the same shortfall that we had in the 37s, that we hear about how great Ocampa society is on the station, but we don't actually see it. And it's a budgeting move, but we only meet Tanis and just one other guy for like a second, and that's not enough of a sales pitch, to hear him come in and say like, oh, you've got nothing here, it's cold and sterile. Like, okay, well, show me, don't tell me. I love exploring the depth of what Tanis is up to, and I love how a story like this just keeps pushing Kes forward, Jennifer Lean, the other MVP here, as she has been. And she's just wonderful in episodes like this that take her seriously and not just as the foil for, like, Neelix's immaturity or something else. Like, when she's center stage, she's wonderful. Kudos to Brannon Braga for coming up with some fun, creepy horror imagery in this script. I feel like they nailed it where it needed to be there. Now, I will admit a couple of biases that take me out of this story and hurt this one just a little bit for me. I usually roll my eyes and tune out of anything that culminates in, the main characters standing in opposition, staring intently at one another, and using mind powers to fight. I also think that telegraphing the building of a weapon that will defeat this particular life form, it takes away something from the ending. But I guess also, so what? Structurally, things get a little messy in Act 5. Tuvok goes to engineering with security, but where are they? And what is Suspiria doing to him and B'Elanna? And why is Kes messing with Tanis? Why does that throw off Suspiria? Like, there's all these things that just kind of happen in Act 5, and how would a force field stop her telepathic powers? Anyway, it's messy, but as the old Cunard ad slogan goes, getting there is half the fun. What I do love is that we have drama that is precisely back to the world building we got with the pilot episode of Voyager. I've really missed that, and it proves that there are good stories to follow without just constantly creating one-off characters and experiences for our crew. I know also that this episode served to cement the decision to keep Voyager out there lost in the Delta Quadrant rather than abandon that whole premise by just having another caretaker who could whisk them back home. And I'm glad that they committed to that. I'm glad then that, as far as this crew knows, that was our last best chance to go home. So I appreciate the many things that this episode did. It was stylistic, it was cool, it was creepy, so to me it holds up. How about you?
Yeah, I really like this episode too, and I think for me it's been one of the more successful, one of the closest in Star Trek, and certainly in Voyager, to balancing these two very strong stylistic themes that don't necessarily blend well together in the same episode. That's horror and thriller. Those are two very specific. Horror's very, it's very visual, and thriller's very mental, in the storytelling elements of it. I think the one thing that was sorely missing in this episode, though, was why was Kes being so heavily pursued, so hard by Tanis? Why? What was the point? I wanted, somewhere in the discovery, I wanted Kes to possess something about her, some kind of rare ability or something that Suspiria needed more from Kes than any other Ocampa that she had under her control. Perhaps somewhere in the beginning of the episode, maybe Tuvok unlocked something in her mind, in their mental training, that made Suspiria aware of Kes in the Delta Quadrant.
Interesting idea. Yeah.
Or perhaps maybe Tanis was so enamored with how natural Kes was developing in their training together. Like, this girl is a natural, much like, and I hate to use this trope, but I'll mention it because it's the best way to describe it, much like the Emperor was impressed with Luke because of Luke's abilities and how he became a Jedi so quickly.
Sure.
It's just the temptation of power that's out there, where someone even more powerful is like, I know that power. I've felt that power before, and that power at one point in time was me. Right? Mm-hmm. So here's someone new on the chessboard. So I just think that because Gary Graham was so good at being so sly, and his whole approach to Tanis was just incredibly well done, I just needed to know why he was so dogged and so insistent about just Kes. Because in the end, she was more powerful than he was. Yeah. Right? And we never got to see that resolved at all. My biggest disconnect in this episode is actually using the name Suspiria.
Oh, huh. Okay.
So the first time I heard that name mentioned, all I heard in the earworm of that was Sinester, like Sinestria.
Okay.
Or Suspiciosa. Something in that whole realm of traits that you feel are just make you feel untrustworthy about this character.
Yeah.
They don't really deserve, the benefit of the doubt. So I know it sounds weird, but that's just kind of like what entered my mind. So I had bias, when this character appeared as that little girl, trope that I mentioned earlier. It's just one of those, okay, you're going to name her something that sounds suspicious. Now you're going to present her as something as suspicious. Obviously, there's something wrong here. And I didn't want that. I wanted my beliefs to be subverted.
Yeah. I get that. So. Yeah, because you start out and you're like, okay, this is probably a bad guy. Just look, Tuvok is building a weapon, right. and we're naming this character as something that sounds weird and creepy. So,
right.
Yeah, I hear you.
Just a couple small adjustments, and some of those are on me, of course. But the only other thing and I asked you this, and I'm going to probably leave my observations here with a question, is did seeing the physical, tentacled version of Suspiria remove the entire mysticism about the Caretaker's race? I mean, did they need to do that in order to prove that they are just a more evolved version of an alien life form that is this powerful?
Yeah.
Because it felt like, they just kind of reduced them to just very standard aliens.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. I get that. All right, well, I think this episode has a lot to chew on, but in terms of messages, telling the audience something, there's a few things that stood out to me here. I do like that line at the very end that Tuvok shares with Kes. Without the darkness, how would we recognize the light? Do not fear your negative thoughts. They are part of you. Words of wisdom from Tuvok to Kes. But then I asked myself, is this really what the episode is about? I don't think that's necessarily about that. Yes, Kes does experience some negative thoughts, but there is a whole process for her to go through before realizing, like, oh, no, this is wrong. Part of it being, oh, this guy just threw my boyfriend across the room. So it isn't necessarily about adopting and absorbing and recognizing the negative thoughts, but I think that message at the end is no less valid. But I do think that there is something here, maybe for Kes and others, not giving into temptation. We see that clearly Tanis has completely handed over his whole identity, his whole life, and everything he believes to Suspiria. And he presents this very intriguing temptation to Kes: have more powers, learn more, become one with the universe, live in a place of pure thought. This is all very tempting. And let me tie this to something else here that's not just the intellectual pursuit, but think about Hyde and Q in Next Generation, when Riker discovers that there is a price to having great powers. Tanis promised powers, not the least of which is just a longer life and oneness with the universe and the embrace of Suspiria. It was all that creepy cult leader stuff with these very intriguing, ethereal, high-minded things to hand to her, but there was something that came along with that that very clearly to Kes came with a price. Just like having the powers of the Q for Riker came with a price that he didn't want to pay. And for Kes, it was recognizing at every step of the way that this could be abused. And her clearly accidentally misusing that power. But I thought the guiding, gentle hand of Tuvok to say, okay, that happened. You can't beat yourself up about it. Now let's get you back on the path now that this is gone. So I think there are some lovely thoughts here wrapped up in this creepy, horror-ish episode. How about you, Norman?
Well, I mean, we are kind of dancing, around that great trope-ish, super heroic moral of great power comes great responsibility, or with great power comes great responsibility. But I think that more so than the moral, I think that the observation of what happened is really a cautionary tale, as I said before. I mean, there's a really interesting study here in the struggle for power. In this case, you have the power of Suspiria over the Ocampa, and they're under her control. And then you have the power of Tanis, who's under her control, using his abilities to kind of control Kes and put her under his control. Mm-hmm. So there's this power struggle of using these telepathic abilities on the surface. But it does present one more common and, say, more viable moral meaning or message here in the storytelling, is that power is the aphrodisiac that demands more power, right? Power is a drug, and the drug of choice that you cannot satiate the insatiable thirst for it. So look at it how it's used with, say, people, and especially, say, the naive youth that Kes presents. How can power be used to completely manipulate the young and the innocent and the trusting and the unsuspecting? This is where Kes has been built up over the course of many, many episodes. Neelix saying, you're too young, you don't understand. And then the doctor's saying, you're too innocent and you don't understand. And now someone who actually does know what she's about and does know that she might be able to understand gives her and unlocks this ability in her. But the thing is that he uses it to weaponize her, or tries to, until, let me be fair, the story doesn't support that anymore, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But what I also loved about this, and as another observation of a moral meaning or message, is how Tuvok comes back in and inserts himself as kind of like this rock, this emotional calm in her storm, right? Again, you have this very volatile, young, naive person who's been given this drug of power and doesn't know how to really wield or manipulate it, and it's so tempting to use abusively. But now you have Tuvok, and he uses the lessons that he's kind of implanted in her over time to, and you saw that again in the beginning, the middle, and at the end as these foreshadowing events that will bring him to the very end conclusion of there are no shortcuts to becoming the best version of yourself. It takes time, it takes commitment, it takes determination, and it takes sacrifice.
I love that. Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Maneuvers.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Adam Brusky, Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, John Mann, Mike Richards, and Mike Schabel. You mean to tell me Kes can basically cook with her mind, and everyone's going to keep putting up with Neelix's food? End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.